Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast, and we are here with another exceptional episode we're so excited to get to tonight. Mr. Dennis Blocker. Dennis, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing excellent. Super excited to have Mr. Newman with us tonight, talk about the book. And I always love having writers on. Being a writer myself, I have so many questions.
And joining us from the East Coast as well, Dr. Roger Newman. Roger, how you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for coming on with the book we were promoting, your new book, Boys.
I was thinking, well, I ought to do something on my side of the family. So I dug into kind of a story that I had grown up with from my father's side of the family, about him growing up with a black brother, and they're growing up together and going off to fight World War II together. And I just thought that story had always intrigued me as well, so thought it might make a good book. And so I started working on that about probably 2 years ago.
How does one go from taking family told stories? I'm sure there's some handwritten letters, some abbreviated documentation around, but how does someone take those stories and turn that into a full descriptive, full color book and bring it to life and the characters in such a beautiful way?
Well, in this case, it was, as I know you've probably talked about other people on your show, a lot of World War II veterans, which my father was, did not talk much about the war. And I think in the acknowledgement of this book, I make some note to the fact that one of my greatest regrets in life are all the conversations I never had with my dad.
Yeah.
So the information that I had about his military career and what he did in the military was really very slim. And that actually required more research. The stories about him growing up as came from family stories. Not a lot of them, again, because he was estranged from his grandfather for a number of reasons. But talking from the stories that I knew and from talking to my siblings and the children of some of my father's brothers and sisters, I was able to get a good bit of information about their early growing up. Alex and Pete, who are the two characters in the novel, they're growing up together in Leakesville, North Carolina during the Great Depression. So that I had a framework for a story there. A lot of it is filled in with fiction, but I tried to keep the heart of that story in place. And then, unfortunately, I know that my dad and Alex went off when World War II started. After they graduated high school, they went off and enlisted together in the North Carolina National Guard, which eventually became the 30th Army Division, the old Hickory Division. But they were immediately separated because of their different races. And my father nor anyone else in the family ever heard from Alex again. There's no records that I've been able to find as to what might have happened to Alex, which probably is a result of a fire at an Army archive during the 70s.
Yes, my family is also a victim of that fire. My grandfather, my mom's father, he worked grave registration over in Europe, and we've discussed this in the past, and much like you were alluding to, their generation didn't discuss it because everybody was there. They were humble. They didn't want to be considered braggadocious. But sadly for us, the following generations who are trying to keep this alive, with the exception of those who are lucky enough to have handwritten letters, maybe correspondence from our grandfathers to their sisters or wives, what have you, because we did the honorable thing, which was not to pester dad or pester grandfather about these horrible memories, they were unable to communicate those stories so we can carry on what they did. And that's the downside of us having respect for our elders back then.
Yeah, it's like I said, it was something I I wish I wish I'd have been more persistent
Yeah.
every day. I'm not positive which company, but he was in the 120th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Army Division.
Was he in that famous Hill 314 where they held back the German panzers on that hilltop?
Absolutely, and that's a big part of the story.
Yeah.
He was on top of the Hill 314 they called it,
Yeah.
and the Battle of Mortain, which in my opinion, an extremely underappreciated uh, battle of importance.
The reason that I asked is my great grandpa, I had two grandpas and a great grandpa in World War II. My great grandpa was in the 30th Infantry Division, 120th Regiment, and he went with them across the Normandy beaches that were, of course, D+4, 6 or something like that. And so he was at Mortain and all that, went through France, then into Holland, and then they crossed over, and he was killed 27 October 44, and he was killed in Aachen, the siege of Aachen. So there's a huge connection there.
Yeah.
And there's a Dutch Belgian family, the Meer family. They put flower. They have adopted his grave, and so we're Facebook friends with them, and we've sent them tons of pictures of him. And matter of fact, a couple of days ago, the Meer family went out to Henri Chapelle American Cemetery, and where a lot of the 30th guys are, and they sent us pictures of roses on his grave. So yeah, our family has a huge connection to that unit. 120th. Wow, what a small world.
When I started doing this book, I really didn't know about that story, and it's research that I did um, about my dad's unit and the 30th. And since finishing the story, I would love, and I hope I can, I'd love to get over to Europe and go to Mortain. And apparently there's quite a lovely memorial to that battle at the top of Hill 314. And I just love to see what my dad looked out over and saw those
They
days that
were
he was on top of that hill.
they single-handedly held back 6 panzer divisions, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, and they're credited with saving the saving everything. I know that when
Right.
the Battle of the Bulge happened, that they plugged in the 30th because they were Old Hickory and they were reliable and they were a veteran. And by the time of the Battle of the Bulge, so they had quite a reputation.
A shout out to those soldiers who fought at the Battle of Mortain. Again, a critical World War II in Europe battle that, everybody knows, like you said, everybody knows D-Day and everybody knows the Battle of the Bulge, but the Battle of the Bulge would have never happened
That's right.
if the 120th Infantry hadn't held uh, and repelled the German counterattack at Mortain, because the Germans were the reason they committed all those panzers and all their Luftwaffe and all the troops was they wanted to uh, break through the American line and cut off Patton's armored divisions that had taken the breakout from Normandy and had raced across the middle of France on their way to Paris. And if the Germans had been able to take Mortain and push the Americans back to the port city, and I'm not sure I'm saying it right, of Arvanches, if they could have done that, it would have completely cut off Patton's armor from their resupply, and they could have picked them off. And who knows how much longer that the battle for Europe would have taken if they hadn't have held and repulsed the Germans at Mortain and allowed what they called the breakout from Normandy to continue. When I started doing this book, I really didn't know about that story, and it's research that I did about my dad's unit and the 30th. And since finishing the story, I would love, and I hope I can, I'd love to get over to Europe and go to Mortain. And apparently there's quite a lovely memorial to that battle at the top of Hill 314. And I just love to see what my dad looked out over and saw those
They
days that
were
he was on top of that hill.
Back to the research and development. The first 3 to 4 chapters of this book is really character development, getting Alex and Pete's backstory, their father, Papa. There's so much learning. I grew up in Kentucky. I grew up in Ohio. I've never heard of a primitive Baptist. The amount of detail and research that goes into that aspect of it. I'm assuming that when your father came back for the war and obviously didn't go back to Leaksville, didn't really have much to do with your grandfather, did religion still play a huge part in your all's upbringing, or was it tampered down a little bit?
No, it was tampered down. It was a bone of contention between my father and his father. My dad stayed in the army, and I grew up on military bases. And on military bases, a lot of the churches were non-denominational.
Sure.
You know, there'd be Catholic churches, and then there'd be Protestant churches. So I most of my childhood on military bases, my mom took us to and Dad usually went with us, but not. We could tell this was not his thing.
Yeah.
But we went to non-denominational uh, Protestant churches on base, and it was something we did as a family, but it was never a major family element of our family.